Welcome to the first episode of AI Alternative Intelligence, a podcast brought to you by Data2X. Each episode we'll be talking to guests who will help us to learn, to question, and to be inspired by really what's possible when we focus on equity in innovation, especially focused on AI. I'm your host, Anand Varghese. I've spent the last 15 years working at the intersection of technology, research, and global development, and I'm really excited to kick off this podcast series and to welcome our guests. Dr. Emily Springer. She runs Techno-Socio-Advisory. She's a responsible AI consultant, and she was recently recognized among the top 100 women in AI ethics in 2024 and is part of UNESCO's Women for Ethical AI platform. We also have Gratiana Fu. She's a data scientist with expertise managing and using global health data, natural language processing, and geospatial analysis. She's also spearheaded considerable research into AI and its ethical implications for its use in international development. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining the conversation. Thanks for being our first guests. And there's a reason we have invited you as our first guest, because you're both co-authors on a paper that Data2X has just published in the Gender Data Foundations of Responsible and Equitable AI. That's a topic we're going to dive into more deeply during the course of the conversation. But I wanted to begin perhaps by laying some groundwork and really beginning with some personal stories from both of you. I don't think it's much of an exaggeration to say that artificial intelligence has sort of embedded itself into our day-to-day and into our conversations, perhaps more rapidly than even the internet or the mobile revolutions that immediately preceded it. And with that expansion, I think there's also been an emerging group of new experts in this field that we are calling responsible AI. Both of you represent this new group. You come at it, however, from slightly different worldviews, from different perspectives. Emily, you're coming at it from more of a policymaker and academic perspective. Graciana, you're coming at it as a data scientist. Let's begin. Really, where did you start your journey in responsible AI? What drew you to this field? Let's start with Emily.
Great. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today on kicking off this really neat new podcast. I appreciate it. So absolutely, my journey to AI and responsible AI, I would say began many, many years ago. So I've been working in international development consulting sort of for my career. I'm trained as an interdisciplinary sociologist, and the universe really handed me a tech job when I was partway through the PhD. And so I paused and I had an opportunity to work in the tech sector. And it was sort of my first peek at gender relationships within a cross-functional tech team. And so that sort of raised my interest in what was happening in terms of gender relationships inside tech organizations, and who feels comfortable to speak at a table and why, and who is welcomed to speak at the table and why. And when I went to finish up the PhD, my dissertation research was about performance metrics in international development organizations, specifically around measuring what happens in development projects around women's empowerment, and sort of the gender-related metrics that we all are busy capturing, and asking what happens when organizations are under the hook to deliver social impact results. And it was a fascinating look at what goes on inside development organizations. And it gave me insight into these sort of data sets that are getting created, and they are supposed to offer a glimpse at what works in development programming. But because they're actually performance metrics, then they sort of get corrupted in a little bit of a way. And so I got really interested in data set creation and sort of the scientization of what we all know is the really messy, locally embedded work of really social impact, improving people's livelihoods and things like that. So that sort of was a peek into the organizational constraints around data sets and data creation. And I was starting to hear people talk about AI and blockchain also at the time. And so I started diving into those because I had had this tech sector experience. And so I started learning everything I absolutely could about AI. And as a sociologist, AI is about every single thing I love, but I would say on steroids. And so when you think through quality data, what does that look like? What is it representing? What's not getting captured in that data? What are the organizational and sort of staffing components that shift and change that data and create different incentives that might take that data in particular directions? When you think about how AI gets rolled out, AI is really, you're thinking about, you want to make predictions to help the future in some way to reduce your risk as a company or potentially to improve efficiencies. But you're taking the past to predict the future. And if you're like me, you look at the social world and you say, whoa, it's so unequal around all of these intersectional dimensions. And so thinking through as a sociologist around what does that mean? What does that imply? And how can we really think through building the world in a different way? And so that sort of led me into a pathway of being a responsible AI consultant, where I work for government, social impact organizations, as well as private sector, doing both research like this project that I got to work on with Data2X, and helping organizations think through the people side of AI builds. And that's everything from, have you sort of outlined what you want your business specifications to be for this AI build? Are you thinking through some fairness bias metrics as you're doing your build and all the change management? And then lastly, I'm an AI literacy trainer. So I'll end there and pass it over to Gratiana.
Yeah, thanks, Gratiana. What about you?
So I'll say I came to AI at a very naive place in my life. Um, I was really interested in building really cool AI products when I first got into data science. It was a part of the reason why I ended up kind of learning the technical skills and the really kind of more gritty data science skills, because I was a little bit interested in trying to build something that came out of the movies, and what we see as like AI can do everything that we want it to do. And a part of me was like, that would be really cool to be able to do. So that's kind of where my interest in developing AI came from. But over the course of my career, I have had the chance to work with a lot of different development projects and development organizations, each of which kind of come to development at a different stage of their, we'll say, data careers. Some organizations that I've worked with have very little knowledge or infrastructure for analyzing big data sets, or using data in a meaningful way, and others um, came to me with like a full understanding of what was possible with the data that they had. And it was kind of over time and over working with those different organizations where I realized the utility of artificial intelligence. I think it I think AI actually has a ton of potential in its applications for development projects. But B, there was always this question of how can we use AI in a useful manner. So it's kind of similar to how Emily like ended, is where I came to as well. Is we have this technology that I personally have the technical skills to be able to create, but are we actually using the technology in a meaningful way? Are we applying the technology to problems that we can actually solve? And do the technologies actually fit the problem? So that's kind of how I ended up in this space. I also, similar to Emily, I do come from a little bit of a sociology background. And so I think this intersection of responsibility and the technical AI pieces, they just kind of came together for me.
Yeah, I can see. Well, I saw Emily sort of doing muted claps as you talked about the sort of real utility of AI in sort of the real world. We've heard this term responsible AI a couple of times now. Uh, Emily, your LinkedIn profile has this great phrase describing yourself as empowering non-techies to speak up at the AI table. I'm hoping that many of our listeners are non-techies. Explain to us all, what do you mean by responsible AI? Perhaps more importantly, what do we mean by irresponsible AI, or when AI is used irresponsibly, perhaps? What are some real world consequences of this side of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And if you are more on the coder or developer side, Gratiana is going to speak for you in just a moment. But if you are sort of consider yourself more the non-techie, then this is the piece for you. And that's what I think is sort of the power of the team of Gratiana and I. And if you have an opportunity to bring together social scientists and data scientists in projects, I want to really encourage you to do that. So before I jump into sort of talking about responsible AI, I think it's important that let's just talk about AI for a second, because I think what happened is AI became a tech forward game. It was about this new technology. And if you work in other tech projects, you typically are part of a cross-functional team in which you have people playing different yet complementary goals to achieve a tech implementation that solves some problem. And in those teams, you have people who are, in business speak, business analysts. And they get to go out and they get to talk with clients or organizations or companies and say, what are your business practices like? What do you want this technology to do or to solve for you? And you focus on the purpose. You focus on the business need. You focus on what that technology should do. And ideally, that team works all that out. You do a bunch of research, you talk to people. It's very human centered. And then you pass that over to your collaborator who is a developer or who is a data scientist. And you say, hey, is there any neat technology that can solve this particular problem? And I think because AI is a newer technology, it has been run by the developers. It's been run by the data scientists. It's been run by people saying, look at this cool new thing we can do. And if you are not a developer or you're not a data scientist, I want you to know that there is a huge role for you to play at the AI table. Because if you work in social impact, if you know the local community, if you know cultural dynamics of the constituents that you're trying to serve in some way, you have a role to play because you could provide the business specifications of what a potential AI tool could or would do. And there are all sorts of subjective decisions that need to happen in an AI build that data scientists might not be best suited to answer. And that's a role that you could play. So, for example, there are lots of different fairness and bias metrics, but you can't take all of them and say we're gonna achieve fairness on all these metrics because it's mathematically impossible. You have to pick which one is right for your context. That is something that a non-data scientist could contribute to a team in a discussion with the AI build team. So the first sort of point there that I want to make is when we think about just AI, getting strong cross-functional teams is a key essential ingredient to responsible AI. Without that cross-functional team, you've got a very tech-forward approach that puts the tech before the sort of the problem it's trying to solve. To Gratiana's point, is this the right tool? Should we be using this? There are like higher level questions that we should be asking. So that's one piece. I'd also say I often talk about how default AI, what I call default AI, is irresponsible. It takes a lot of work to create an AI product that is really truly responsible, thinking through fairness, thinking through safety, security, thinking through consent procedures. Right now, how do we even get meaningful informed consent of participants when what's happening with AI is mind-boggling even to folks that are in data-rich, sort of digitally saturated spaces? We click through terms and conditions all the time, but do we even understand how our own data could be used? So I think globally, we need to rethink consent as part of sort of the effort to be more responsible. And certainly, you sort of hear all these news headlines around what happens when you are sort of irresponsible. We get a reproduction of bias and inequality. And that's exactly what the social impact sector or public well-being, if you work in public policy, that's exactly the sort of thing that we want to be addressing. And so that goes back to, if we're taking the past to predict the future, we come into a conundrum if we really care about social impact. And it means we need to use this technology really carefully. So we can think through harms in different ways. We can think about allocative harms. Are you a university using AI to select the students most likely to graduate in 4 years? That question makes a lot of sense for a university to be asking from their own logistical and budgetary considerations. But if we plug an AI tool in there, it could select the people who already are most likely to succeed, and you could deny admission to more people who would be first generation college graduates and things like that. So we need to be thinking really critically, and that goes back to the socio-technical piece. We always want to be thinking about the fact that technologies are interacting with people. So one of the things I'm always talking about is we absolutely can use AI for meaningful social outcomes, but it requires that we slow down and think really carefully about how to leverage the technology to achieve that. And I'm seeing a big push and a lot of pressure. A lot of executive leaders are saying, we need an AI tool. But at the same time, they're not putting the dollars behind creating strong cross-functional teams, building out and allowing a build team the space and time to iterate and test for real-world bias and discrimination. And so we sort of have this AI fever right now. And I'd say in the social impact sector, we have such a cool and neat opportunity to lead on this because we put public well-being at the forefront. And so the more that we can figure out how to do this, we actually have a huge opportunity to perform thought leadership across sectors. I'll close
Emily,
there.
you bring up really fascinating points. Some are kind of structural. They're baked into the way organizations work, whether that's who's at the table, whether that's how they're thinking about problem solving. Is it tech first, or is it problem first, or human first? Both of you have kind of hinted at the role of data in all of this. I want to get to the structural, but before we do that, I want to dig down a little bit into sort of what's the role of data in either exacerbating or solving some of the problems that you've outlined. It seems to me that, Emily, you spoke about kind of data-rich, technology-rich places, but the social sector isn't always working in those kinds of places. What's at the heart of our data needs as we go into an AI-powered future? Gratiana, you're the data scientist here. Maybe you can give us an insight here.
I'll attempt to answer a giant question in just a couple minutes.
Hey, just a couple of minutes here, but feel free to take your time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is perpetually the question of what data is available, what can we use to even identify the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think I like to think about it in terms of building data sets and actually using them. I think on the first piece, when we're building data sets, I think there has to be a lot of thought that's being put into the development of data sets. That includes why are data sets actually being created, what kind of technologies are being used to develop those data sets, what kind of caveats need to be attached, and what kind of documentation needs to be attached to those data sets for data to be usable. I think one thing that consistently comes up in this conversation about responsible AI and AI in general in development is that I hear this a lot, is that there just isn't any data. There just isn't any data to build these systems. There isn't good data to even do just like very standard descriptive analyses. And I think that piece is super important before we even get to the artificial intelligence piece of it, because if we don't have our foundation base data set, we can't really build anything else. I think a common phrase that's talked about in AI is like, if you don't have good data, you're going to have like bad AI systems. So I think that very much is the heart of some of the technical maybe issues surrounding AI and responsible AI. And then I think the other piece of using data sets, Emily touched on quite a bit of this, but speaking as a data scientist, I'll be super honest here, and having worked with a lot of other data scientists, I think there is a very common perspective amongst more technical folks that sometimes we think we know it's best. And at the end of the day, I don't always think that's true. I think that data scientists and software developers and other tech folks um, uh, kind of forget that the social side of things is really what makes the product use, useful and usable. And I think something that I would like to see more of is what Emily called out of interdisciplinary teams, because me as a data scientist can bring a ton of technical skills to something, but I don't necessarily know anything else about the other piece, and I have to check myself a lot of times, and I think other technical folks should be checking themselves to be more open and to check their own assumptions about the social pieces that are going on, because I think ultimately that will trickle down to the impact of AI on its users and and contribute a lot more to those kind of irresponsible AI pieces that Emily is talking about.
I really want to spend a little bit of time on the paper that you've both written. I was lucky enough to sort of see some earlier versions of it and got a sneak peek into how it was developing. I think one of the things that you've really drilled down on is not just gender data in general, but gender data and the need for gender data as a kind of foundational piece to create the kind of equitable, responsible AI tools that we're hoping we'll end up using. Tell me about the role of gender data in developing more responsible AI tools.
I think going back to what I was saying about data in general, without it, we don't really know what the problem is. We can have a bunch of folks in the sector who are saying, this is something that I'm seeing, and there is a large like group of folks in the development sector who will only trust the numerical data. You can have a ton of folks who are calling for change and who are saying these are the issues that we're facing, and these are this is what needs to be changed. And ultimately, without being able to combine that with some of the quantitative data and analyses, we kind of run into a little bit of a wall. So I think the gender data is such a big piece of that in being able to identify and put numbers to the problem itself, and then to be able to continue the analysis into these are the issues that we're seeing. What do we actually do about that? And what data do we have to be able to identify what we can actually do about that next? Without any of that, we're kind of throwing a bunch of different things at the wall and trying to figure out what sticks. And a lot of times things don't really stick. So I think that's a big thing that I think about a lot, is just what and how can we get some better gender data? How can we fill in those gaps that we're seeing and some of the blanks in the data sets that we're seeing, to be able to provide a more comprehensive and a more real, I guess, picture of what is actually going on in the world.
So then gender data really isn't just about filling in gaps about data that are related to women and girls. It's also about really building a better foundational picture upon which then the AI can be built. It sounds like there's more than just benefits for women and girls if you have more and higher quality gender data baked into the kind of models that you're building. Emily, do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to sort of come in and sort of divvy up a little bit of what we're talking about here, because it's a huge topic and there are so many different angles that we could talk about it. So, as you all are aware, Data2X is really focused on improving the gender data sort of situation that we have in order to improve policy making and advocacy. And they split up gender data into 3 different categories. So that's sex disaggregated data, really sort of splitting out the situation analyzed by sex. Then we have data about women, girls, and gender diverse communities. And that's things like gender-based violence, sexual health, items like that. Then you've got data about gender-related issues. That's sort of the gendering of professions and things like that. I would say broadly, when we're talking about gender data sets, we're really talking about machine actionable data. So I'm just going to, Gratiana, you can correct me, but from my non-data scientist side, that's thinking through sort of Excel spreadsheets that are massive in size and are well labeled, well coded. Ideally, there's a data dictionary. You've got a bunch of information about sort of what features you have. And when we think through machine actionable data and how organizations and corporations are using it, I would say often we're talking about gender data sets that are sex disaggregated data. And that's really what companies, organizations are using and feeding into models for training. Then, and push back on me, Gratiana, if you disagree with any of this, I would say personally, I also work in tech-facilitated gender-based violence. And so we're seeing a lot of data come out around what is happening to women and girls and gender diverse communities when they engage online. And they're having a very different experience online vis-a-vis AI-powered social media algorithms that are changing their experiences. And then we can also think through, when it comes to AI, there's increasing information around data about gender issues. So how many women data scientists are there? What's the talent pipeline for AI leadership? Are women adopting AI at the same rates of men? There are lots of concerns there. So there are lots of different ways that we could take this. But if we just think about that sex disaggregated gender data set, and I will say, I think, the last several decades, we've been fighting for a greater recognition of gender and the idea of multiple genders, gender identity. And I would argue that as of right now, Gratiana, come in if you've got some neat, cool use case or example you can tell me about, but we're really solidifying gender as male, female. And because in order to represent something for an AI model, you have to represent it mathematically. And so we're right back to binary 0 and 1. And so that's one concern that we should all have around sort of gender data sets as we move forward. One of the things that I really love about this report, and I encourage all of you to read it, is this sort of issue that I've been wondering about is, what is the right use of even sex or segregated data in a build? I know it's a common data science technique to say we're not going to pay attention to gender. We're going to delete the column of zeros and ones because we don't want a gender biased AI model. But what research is finding is that even when you delete that column, you still end up with gender bias as an outcome in your AI model, because gender can be read through all these other features. Essentially, it's being read through other features that are included in the AI model. And so sorting through exactly what the right use of gender data is in an AI build and testing, training, things like that, that's one area where I think it would be great to sort of get a discussion and a collaboration going amongst the gender data community. So I'd invite all of you to reach out, not only to Data2X, but to us, and we're building our future together right now. So if you feel like you're behind, or if you feel like you don't have a contribution to make, I'd say you absolutely do. These are issues that are unfolding in real time, and we are literally writing history as we go here. So that's one piece. And the other is really thinking through how we need gender data to actually audit. So responsible AI is getting up and running. We've got AI governance procedures, and we need gender data in order to even assess if a model is being biased against women and girls, or biased against any other demographic group. We need that data in order to audit. And we've got the EU AI Act coming into force kind of as we speak. We've got new regulations unfolding across the global landscape. And so we're going to need data to be able to demonstrate either compliance with that or leadership in techniques around cool ways to make sure, if you're operating from a corporate perspective, to make sure you're meeting all of your customer needs, and in a social impact sector to make sure that this AI tool is having the positive impact that you want. Without that data, you're not going to be able to assess for fairness and bias.
We have talked, and I want to go back to the kind of structural points that both of you made about how organizations are put together, how teams are composed, the kind of built-in biases that both individuals and organizations might reflect in their processes. One of the things that I love about the paper is that it kind of closes on a real world call. It calls stakeholders from government, from civil society, from private sector to kind of act. If you had them in the room in front of you, if you had a couple of these decision makers from government or private sector, civil society, these other stakeholders, tell me a few of the kind of concrete actions that you'd like them to take. Again, kind of addressing some of those more structural issues, going beyond the data, perhaps. And perhaps we can close on that conversation. Emily, you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. Goodness, there's so much good and hard work to be done in this space. If you are a funder, I would encourage you to think through key levers. So one of the things that's a key lever, as Gratiana mentioned, data. We need more inclusive data sets. But guess what? Just like before when we're talking about regular data, not even machine actionable data, it's costly to collect, clean, organize data. It requires resources. So if you can invest in creating inclusive, intersectional data sets that are really thinking through capturing some of those features that would help with auditing in the future, and making sure that AI tools work for everybody and not just those that sit in data-rich spaces. And just a caveat on that, even in data-rich spaces where smartphones are extremely sort of ubiquitous, if you will, research shows that AI increases inequalities. So if AI is increasing inequalities, even in the best data-rich spaces, then we really need to pause and say, whoa, we got to think through this. We got to build really strong data sets. We got to build representative data sets. It takes time, it takes money, but it's a key lever. And once data sets get created, they get reused. And that's a blessing and a curse. So if you've got a really strong data set, then that's fantastic. And if the people using it are using it appropriately and for the purpose that it was made for, then that's excellent. Otherwise, it just becomes this key lever that is pushing forward inequalities and inequities. And so we need to be really careful about that. I would also say I see a lot of funders having calls for, hey, AI pilots, funding to work in, improving agricultural livelihoods. But when you look at what they're funding the AI build. They are not funding what Gratiana and I are talking about. The holistic team, funding social scientists, funding community experts, funding the careful participatory work that needs to get done. So I think that's one piece. And then when it comes to the build, are you funding just the build of the AI model, or are you funding the build of the model within a responsible AI frame? That also takes time. The cool thing is if you fund that in the next couple of years, you will be contributing to amazing thought leadership because we are setting the norms. We are so lucky to be alive at the moment that humanity broadly adopts AI, but I would argue with that comes great responsibility. And so are we taking that responsibility seriously? The actions we take in the next few years will reverberate throughout history, and that's a strong ROI. If you need a strong ROI, I think that's a big one. The other thing I would say is that grassroots organizations are the powerhouse of locally embedded, meaningful social development. And where's the funding to help them upskill in AI and understand this new landscape that they're operating within? So fund AI literacy for broad stakeholders. And I think that is going to enable grassroots organizations to sort of be able to be a player in the AI landscape. And right now we need those voices. We need their participation. And there are others like myself who need to be in conversation with them and be able to actually say, how can I be silent at the table and how can I listen and learn? And that's extremely important. If you look at the differences across regions right now, a lot of folks in the majority world, they're interested about data sovereignty, AI sovereignty, post-colonial computing. Like, how can we think? Like, they're concerned about different issues, and we need to be listening to that and paying attention to that. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I want to kind of call out, but I think that's a big one. I'd also just say, think through the impacts of AI tools now. We are seeing a lot of tech-facilitated gender-based violence on the rise, and talk about a socio-technical approach, algorithms that sort of make posts go viral. They're silencing women and girls, gender diverse communities, activists, journalists. There are all sorts of ways that this is hooking into larger questions around democracy. What information do we trust in today's world? Things like that. So we've got a lot of big ticket items ahead, but slow and steady work. I believe we can get there. What are your thoughts, Gratiana?
Yeah, I'd like to give Gratiana the kind of final word on this as we close.
I guess I'll speak to some of the more technical folks that I'm hoping are listening. I think funders is a really big group of folks that we often talk about. And I think the inclusion of more technical folks in creating funding proposals and just gut checking that what you're asking for from folks is actually doable, is technically feasible, I think is a big thing that I've seen across the industry and across development. I've seen a lot of requests for proposals in my years in development where the ask is too big. the ask is to solve this gigantic problem with one AI tool, and that just isn't technically feasible. I think that's a big cause of the creation of AI products that end up being developed and then just dropped and not maintained. So I think the incorporating technical expertise into the funding process, into the selection of uh, folks to develop these products, I think is really key. And I think technical folks throughout all of the stakeholder groups that we've called out in our paper, in government, in civil society, I think you have so much more of a role to play than just sitting at your computer and coding. Um, there is a wealth of technical knowledge that exists, and I do think it is our job as data scientists, as folks who know the really nitty-gritty, to be able to communicate to other folks at your organizations, and with your partners, to make them understand what it is that you're actually doing. It does everyone a disservice to assume that the people that you're talking to are not smart enough or don't have the technical expertise to fully understand what like an AI model is, or what model you're using. But it's through that connection and through that slow kind of teaching and learning and growth that I think the responsible piece of AI can really be created. Otherwise, we just continue to be siloed into this. Here are the technical folks. Here are the folks that are saying, I just want this. We just end up not bridging those gaps.
Emily.
Anand, I'd love to come in before we close.
Yeah.
I completely agree with everything that Gratiana has just said, and I would be remiss if I didn't call out. We are talking about creating gender data sets. We're talking about, using AI in exciting and innovative ways to solve social problems and work towards gender equity and gender equality. We have to recognize at the same time that AI does use a lot of environmental resources. It does use fresh drinking water for people around the world. And we need to be thinking and understand that often women and girls also bear the brunt of climate change. And so we need to be thinking about adopting AI, not only to solve these cool and neat problems, but we need to be backing up and thinking about it from a systems approach to ensure that we aren't, making progress on one while also creating new problems for women and girls in their lived experiences.
Yeah, definitely an entire topic unto itself that requires perhaps a conversation for another day. But thank you for ending on that. Thank you for ending on the kind of calls to action for different communities. And thanks for joining us for this sort of kickoff of the podcast. Emily, Gratiana, I encourage all of you who are listening to read the paper that they wrote. The paper, again, is The Gender Data Foundations of Responsible and Equitable AI. It's a great read. It's an accessible read. And I encourage all of you to kind of dig into the topic of gender data and AI, but also listen to our upcoming podcasts on this topic and others. Thanks again.